In my opinion, San Francisco is much safer than it was in 1906. This is not to say that the city is perfect. Our newer buildings are definitely far more earthquake resistive than the average building was in 1906. However, this is not to say that perfection exists. The older buildings, some of those built immediately after the earthquake and some that survived the earthquake, are really death traps, and some of those will come down. So the performance of buildings in general will be better, but we cannot and should not expect perfection. The fire hazard in San Francisco is far reduced, certainly much more reduced than it was in 1906. I must really put this in the perspective of a change that does reflect on the earthquake hazard. In 1906, San Francisco was essentially a wooden town. It's one of the reasons that there wasn't greater disaster than we did have. About 20% of the loss in 1906 was due to earthquake. The other 80 was due to fire. I do not anticipate anything resembling this ratio again. Indeed, it might well be reversed. However, the great number of wood frame buildings in 1906, and I am repeating because it is very important, survived excellently, and it's this excellent performance of wood frame dwellings and structures, which, while a fire hazard, makes San Francisco and so many cities with wooden construction safe in case of an earthquake.
Certainly, if we had another great earthquake, the damage could be enormous. It's a very difficult thing to estimate because we're limited in the kinds of data we have available for extrapolation since the past into the present. The difficulty, of course, being principally one of much greater population today and a much greater degree of development of the country in terms of industrial installations and things of that sort. I think that it's very likely, however, that the damage under such circumstances could be measured in the billions of dollars. And in the Bay region, for example, were we to have another great shock, it could amount to something on the order of 10 billion.
The data are telemetered from the stations here on the map into our Central Earthquake Mechanism Laboratory in San Francisco with the idea of allowing us to keep tabs upon the microearthquakes which occur periodically along the San Andreas Fault here in Central California. ESSA's station here at Olima is located at the headquarters of the Point Reyes National Seashore at approximately the location of the epicenter of the 1906 earthquake. However, the earthquake level here, the level of microearthquakes, is very low, practically zero in this particular stretch of the fault. At San Andreas Lake, from which the fault takes its name, we send another signal in. Similarly, from Mount Diablo in the East Bay, Castle Rock, and so on down to our Stone Canyon Geophysical Observatory in San Benito County, which is perhaps the prototype of a large-scale focal mechanism, earthquake mechanism type geophysical observatory.
This sort of suggestion has been made evidently by several people during the past year or so, and it has commanded the attention of a great many people in this part of the country and has aroused a good deal of interest. I think, though, that any earth scientist or other responsible student in geologic and geophysical areas would regard this as nonsense, sheer nonsense. That is, the possibility of a substantial portion of California suddenly sliding into the ocean. In the first place, the geometry of the situation is entirely wrong for this sort of possibility. In brief, there's no place for the state to slide to. In the second place, the notion of such enormous, such grand kinds of displacement is all right if we're looking at it in the context of geologic time, that is, in millions or tens of millions of years. But when we consider such a thing in terms of an individual event, then we get into the nonsense category.
The predictability of small earthquakes is very good. We can very easily say that somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, you're going to feel an earthquake within the next month or so. This will, in all likelihood, however, be a small earthquake. Major earthquakes at the present state of the art cannot be predicted with any more than a very broad generalization. San Francisco, Central California, has had major earthquakes in the dim distant past, 1906, 1838, and back in the prehistoric past, as we learned from the geologic record. However, we are not in a position to say that next Tuesday at 9 a.m. San Francisco will have a big one. We just can't do that. It may be 600 years to the next one.
If we use the term prediction in the sense of its common usage for most people, the answer to whether we can predict earthquakes now or are likely to be able to in the next few years must remain no. Charles Richter and many other authorities have been most emphatic on this point. If, however, we mean prediction in the general sense, that is, in the sense of are we going to have another great earthquake in California, then one can predict, and the answer would be yes, we certainly shall have one. But if we mean, can we say where it will be and when, we cannot predict. Now, there's another very specialized kind of prediction that I prefer to call warning, that may well be feasible and in use during the next decade. and hopefully early rather than late during the coming decade. This would give us a warning of a great shock, perhaps an hour, maybe even 2 hours prior to its occurrence. It would depend upon sophisticated instrumentation of some of the major active faults in the state, instrumentation that would measure very sensitively certain kinds of changes in magnetic or other properties of rocks that would occur during the minutes or few hours prior to failure. A good deal of research has been done by several government agencies and universities, both in Japan and this country, highly pertinent to the solution of this problem. And results so far look very promising.
I don't know if anything will happen in the near future, but based on all the available scientific knowledge, I don't see the risk today being any different than it was 10 years ago, or what I would expect it might be 10 years from now. We simply cannot predict earthquakes as to time, place, and severity at the present.